Although we've covered many of the more obvious formatting options in previous lessons, there's still some more subtle yet interesting formatting characteristics of a pivot table that are good to be aware of, namely layouts and grouping. Much of how pivot tables display data in the cells is automatic, but layouts will help us tweak this automatic formatting a bit, and grouping will let us add additional levels of categorization to your pivot table for information that's not necessarily in your source data. So a layout dictates to Excel how data will be formulated when you have multiple row categories. And there are three basic types. And the first one, the one we're most familiar with in the default one, is called compact. And what that does is if you have multiple rows in your data, for example here we've got state, city, and zip, all those categories will be in the same column. They're all in column A. And you see how Excel, as I expand, just indents a couple of characters to get to the next level. And that's the compact view, the compact layout, and that is the default. The next one we'll look at is called the outline. And we'll go here to the layout command and choose outline. Now, this layout actually puts each category in its own column. So the state will be in column A, city in column B, and zip in column C. It's a little bit, well, it's a little more like an outline in the traditional sense in that each column has its own values. And the last format we're going to look at is called tabular. We'll click the layout drop down again and go to tabular layout. Now this one is a little bit more utilitarian than some of the others. Each row value has its own column, just like outline. So state's still in column A, city in B, zip code in C. The difference is the first value of each category shares the row with its parent. So you see how Arizona, Clifton are on the same row. Now if I expand Clifton, the first data point for zip code's on that same row too. So this is really going to make an efficient use of space in our pivot table because there won't be any blanks. Watch the difference when I switch back to outline. You see how we get state, and then city's another row, and then zip's a third row. And again, that tabular just puts them all together on the same row. And on the compact and outline layouts, you also have the option to put the subtotals at the top or the bottom of the section. And you do this like we went over in the other lesson, just by clicking show subtotals at top or bottom from the subtotals menu. So let's go back and make that compact again. And we'll roll all these up. Now, grouping allows you to add categories to your pivot table where there might not be a corresponding field in the actual data. Some examples might be grouping the rows by region or salesperson. Now, ideally, it's best to see if there's a way you can incorporate these discrete values into your source data or build a lookup or something like that. The grouping is a nice feature, though, if you want to make a quick roll-up here and there. So we'll just show you an example of how to do it. In our table, we have it organized by state, then city, then zip code. Meanwhile, we might want to group our data and assign groups of states to our sales team. So make sure the pivot table is collapsed to the state level, and let's sort it by state as well. So now what we're going to do the group is we're going to highlight A5 through A8, Arizona, California, DC, and Florida. And what we want to do is we want to assign those to one of our good salespeople. We're going to assign those to Jane Austin. From the Pivot Table tab, we're going to go over to the Group command, and we're going to group these selected items. Now you see it just made another level up. Now it just calls it Group 1, but unlike some of the other labels sometimes, this time you can just rename Group 1. Well, now let's go ahead and make another group. Let's highlight Georgia through Minnesota and make that a group, and we will call that one Bob Monroe. Now for New York to South Carolina, see if you can make that group assigned to Amy Baker. That's right, just highlight the items you want, click Group, and type in Amy Baker. And the last three, Tennessee through Virginia. We will group that to be Steve Reese. And now you have different groups by salesperson. This is kind of neat. We were able to do it on the fly really fast. The only problem is these groupings won't necessarily stay around. If our pivot table changes drastically or if new values get added, it's not going to know necessarily to associate new states with these items. And that's why it's always better to try to incorporate whatever groups you have into your data. So although layouts and groupings are kind of lesser used features of pivot table formatting, they're still good tools to know. Utilizing the different layouts will give you greater flexibility, especially when you might be using the pivot table in conjunction with another application or something. And grouping rows can really help you put that extra touch on a pivot table by letting you create groups on the fly right from your pivot table.